Thank you, Archana, for referring Jim, and she has a lot of nice things to say about you. I will ask her to say those first, and then we'll come to you. Yes, Archana, please tell us about Jim.
Oh my, okay. Oh my God, I feel honored. So welcome, Jim. It's a wonderful virtual space that we are all together from different parts of the world, Vikram, you and me. But it's my pleasure to introduce you. I can say that I have learned a lot from Jim, and particularly the Indigenous conflict resolution practices. And it's not just the practices, but his passion is something that drives people. And I think Jim comes from a very humble and human space and connects with you. And you will see that in his presentation. He is a wonderful person and very transparent. And I think he comes from lived experiences as well, which is very powerful. So I'm really appreciative of you giving time, Jim, and sharing what you have learned and you will be sharing today as well. Always, always much, much appreciated.
So, Jim, that's the introduction I got, which what Archana told me. So it can't be better. So.
That's all good. I appreciate that. I find myself in a position where, I'm not a social worker. I'm not a lawyer. I'm none of those things, right? I graduated from civil engineering in Mohawk College 25 years ago. And through process, I became a mediator. I was in between, say, the chiefs, my representative chiefs in the government for a lot of years, back and forth. And realizing that lived experience and how people would act, how people would get, that was really my training ground for later on in life when opportunity presented itself, become accredited. So yeah, it's quite the journey.
No, really nice, and I know that. I mean, I've put that whole down there, the background. But you want to tell us about the community, the Cayuga Nation, and all that, because that's a lot there. That's a lot there.
Sure. So that's let's see that's how we introduce ourselves. I'll introduce myself now. So my name's Doxtdator. Wolfan speaks to the clan mother came, and then her mother from the time. We're wolves, right? So that's our clan we identify with. Cayuga, that is the 6 names of our confederacy. So we're one nation inside of that. That's what I identify with. And Haudenosaunee is how we identify ourselves as a whole, right? We're Haudenosaunee. We're people of the Longhouse. That's who we are. So when I give that introduction to people, they can draw a lot on from where I've been, where I've come from, and what my intentions are even. Because being a Haudenosaunee, one of the things they tell you is it's imperative almost is that we carry a good mind around, right? A good mind is free from anger, free from jealousy, any kind of negativity that would come into one. Once you can free yourself from that, you can sit in a good mind and hear almost anything and come up with some solutions or some kind of way forward. And that's what our ancestors, that's going right back to who we call our peacemaker. Our peacemaker give us instructions, right? He gave us instructions on how to live, and living in a good mind was one of those. The other instruction he gave us was to tell us that an angry mind will become violent. So we're always paying attention to that angry mind. We tend to it, we can stop it from becoming violent, right? So there's a lot of practical uses from just the teachings and just the way that they've kind of said go forward and be. You can feel that from generations back when you're doing the work. So
yeah, but what is going to happen, Jim, is that first, if you've been able to see some of the sessions of the symposium, if you can tell us about the symposium, I'll be really happy. But otherwise,
sure
of
thing,
course,
yeah,
please.
So I've been watching the videos, and I noticed something. And a really good friend of mine and a mentor, John Bocage, was on just the other day. I met John Bocage 20 years ago or so. He was the chief of Wasauksing First Nation, and I was, his technician for all purposes that came to look at the community and tell him the technical things. We gained a bond through there, and through the years, and just like this symposium, it gives you, like, this symposium, as well. I'm comparing you and John Bocage, is that it's just this constant learning, constant sharing, and that's what makes us whole, right? That's what makes us together. When you know what I know, and I see that in the symposium. I've listened to a number of guests, and they're bringing it from their perspective, right? They're saying to you that from my Indigenous perspective, this is how we sort this out, setting aside the colonial way, right? Where we're looking to punish and we're looking to shame over here. That's not what we're looking to do over here. And I feel that from all the speakers, or the number of speakers I've listened to anyways, that's what you're trying to draw out, that there is alternatives to conflict resolution. And I appreciate that. This is a worldwide thing that we can all join in on, and we have a term in Haudenosaunee, we say we're of one mind of this, right? We're of one mind. We all understand it the same way. And I really try to, whenever I speak, try to bring everybody to that one mind. So.
Because the thing is that the colonization aspect, definitely really important, which I have a symposium coming up in September, which starts on 15th September, which you also have to be part of, on colonization, decolonization, and mediation. Because I was just telling Archana about this, that I wanted, of course, this to come first, only because let's talk about the positives, all the good things about the practice. Because when we move into colonization, a lot of negative aspect will come out of that, and I don't want to go into that first. I mean, there's so many positives that we have to talk about, so let's do that. So that's why the little difference. I mean, because it's a different session, let me just put out that on mediatorvikram.com, the link to the schedule is there. The schedule has all the YouTube, the recordings, all the links are there, and the participants, their details are there, so they can watch it there. And Ken Cloke gave the inaugural address, which by itself was wonderful. And of course, it was always a pleasure listening to him. So all the recordings are there. So I won't take more time of yours. Jim, please, whatever you want to tell us more about yourself, and then the thing, Archana knows the drill. I come in whenever you want me to come in, if you want me to come in, and of course, Archana, please.
I think it's important to tell a bit of my backstory in context of kind of where I landed, and it's very much a cultural thing that has happened over time, right? So for all purposes, for 35 years of my life, I walked around a lot, unconscious, if we will, right? Just kind of going through motions, doing what I was supposed to do. You get married, you buy a house, you have kids, you live your life, and ultimately, all of it caught up with me. And the work-wise, I was successful at work. I worked for the Chiefs of Ontario and the Assembly of First Nations. So I traveled the country, coast to coast to coast, and visited First Nations all around. So it was a really good job. But one day it just fell down, and I was locked in, and I didn't know what was wrong. And divorce came, and then eventually down the road we got some assessments to say what is wrong here, right? And in that moment in time, the fellow that assessed this really realized that for me, I was the first person in 5 generations not to be in residential school, right? So everybody before me went to a residential school. My ex-wife was part of what they call here in Canada the 60s scoop, right? So they closed down residential schools, the residential part, and basically what they did was just come and took kids individually and put them into foster care, right? So the whole operation was all about separation from culture, separation from community. So in that diagnosis of complex form of PTSD, and complex being that a trauma happened, nothing happened, another trauma happened, nothing happened, it just kept on going, right? And one day, they tell you that you can go to a healing lodge. You can go and you can regress this trauma. And to a fellow that has not done that kind of work before, it sounds a little bit suspect, right? It just nothing sounds that easy, and it wasn't that easy. But you just don't think that there could be a step taken and then a change made. But essentially, what they did was they helped me go back in time to see the worst of my traumas, right? And they walked me back in my mind to be there with it, right? and to tell those folks what I thought of them and what a new decision about that moment in time. And we had to do that probably for 10 major things that happened in my life, right? After that point in time, they keep you in a meditation and they meditate you back 7 generations, okay? So 7 generations back, so that you can see, smell, touch, talk to, be with your ancestors, so that you can learn what it is you were supposed to be doing. What was your original instructions on this earth, right? Because when you're going against your original instructions, you're of a split mind, right? And that split mind is the confusion, right? So in my journey back, what I saw, what they told me, I was supposed to be a peace builder and a farmer. And I was a long ways from where I was, so I had a lot of work to do. So from that point in time, I had to, I got out and I did a bunch of personal work for myself. EMDR was magnificent to bring change. And then I started on mediation courses, and I became a accredited family mediator. Then an opportunity presented itself in my community. There were 2 individuals, Dr. Rick Hill and Dr. Bob Antone Cat. They're my mentors. They're the people that created, it's called the Indigenous Dispute Resolution model, right? IDR. And IDR speaks to our process and how we work things out, right? And how that goes is this: when you do something wrong, the idea of coming up to you and saying, you did wrong, this is your punishment, and now don't do that again. And we don't sit well in that, because we know how one would react to it, right? So instead, I have to talk to you about all that's happened. Even if that story is long, 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 it stretches into your childhood, I have to listen and help make sense of it for you coming forward. And that once we get the sense of it, then we can start focusing in where you need your treatment. You need trauma regression. You might need a ceremony to deal with some bad spirit that's been going on in you. There's a whole bunch of avenues that can go once we got figured out on a cultural point of view, where you're at, what has happened, right, to you. And we want to bring you back to your good mind. What work do we need all to do? Well, once we know that, we'll all be of one mind to know that about you, right? Me, you, the elders, whoever else is in the room, will all know that. And they'll be my supports all the way along in case I forget, right? So that IDR process speaks to looking at the traumas, speaks to getting people to the healing they need, right? And it speaks to helping them find what their original instructions were supposed to be. Because I can fix you all up, get you all straightened out, but if you don't know where you're going, you're likely just to end up in the same place that you ended up in before, right? So this IDR process that those 2 my mentors have developed is our way forward, right? That's our way forward as a nation, as nations. We've been in Canada here as Indigenous people. We have been brutalized. The communities are in shambles. Some, right? There's a lot of rough places that, due to the violence that has happened on them, it's hard for them to recover, right? But I feel that once we get a number of communities all building up and creating what I would call restorative communities, restorative spaces, that it becomes a thing that we're not afraid of anymore. It's just the thing that we do, right? And that goes back, you'll go back 300 years when that used to be what we did. So there's been a gap in there. And someone would say 300 years, well, okay, that's fine. 300 years is a long time. But we practiced it for thousands before, right? It's like riding a bike. It's in your blood and memory. You remember what it is, right? So the IDR is one of my modalities that I practice. I deal a lot in child protection mediation. I deal a lot in kinship plans. Kinship plans in Canada, if you didn't know, are plans that basically, if an individual had a baby and they weren't able to take care of it, then they have kin over here that say, listen, you don't need to go through the whole adoption process. We'll come to an agreement over here that we will take care of your child while you get better, right? Those kinship agreements can be quite complicated and quite layered, because you're dealing with folks with a lot of trauma, right? A lot of trauma has gone on in their life, so the convincing is tougher, right? Because once trauma happens for people, it's very hard for them to trust that things will happen in the way that they're going to happen. They're so in belief that they're just waiting for the second shoe to drop that they'll quit right there, right? And often with clients, we have to talk to them down to that level, that I'm saying to you that I understand that you're contemplating this thing back and forth. And I find that once you make those connections and you really can be inside with them to what they're thinking or feeling, that's when the journey can really start for folks, because it's so scary for them, right? It's a scary notion. So
what now? The only thing is, Jim, I think Archana wanted to leave, so she wanted to say bye to you, maybe me also, before she goes.
No, I didn't want to interrupt. I'm sorry, but I will take a leave. And of course, I'm looking forward to watching the recording and connecting with you both later on. Thank you so much. Please continue. And I'm sorry I have to leave.
Thank you, Archana. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for your session. And thank you for connecting me with Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Jim. And thank you, Vikram. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, Jim. Sorry, please.
It's okay.
So now you are taking us through Indigenous peoples and mediation, everything. Now, like I said, it's your show. I come in if and when you want me to come in.
Okay, so part of, like, you know, I do a lot of work in communities, right? So a whole community will call me up and say, hey, we have some work here, right? And they might have some work in child protection. They might have some work in restorative practices, right? Restorative practices meaning they might have some conflicts going on, right? And they might need some training, right? I train in restorative practices. I train in the Indigenous Dispute Resolution model. So I do all those kind of trainings, right? And when I go to those communities, what I'm finding is that the conflict is so high and it's been going on for so long that people just get used to it, right? So I see myself as very much a disruptor, right? Because if I come in, and imagine if I came into your house, right? You know, I don't know people that are living in there. Let's just say there's 5, right? And there's a problem somewhere, right? That if I came and asked you and everybody else these questions, I said, you know, Vikram, what happened, right? Just not what did you do, not what did happen to you, just what happened, right? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who has all been affected by what was done? And what needs to be done to make things right? If I went and asked all 5 people that question and brought them to a circle, we would all be as knowledgeable as each other in that moment. And in fact, that sometimes is disruptive, right? That's a disruptive practice. And that's what peacemaking is. It is disruption. You're disrupting the darkness. You're disrupting these things that are going on. And you, as a mediator, we know you have to withstand the anger that comes from that disruption. You get me? You have to be able to maintain yourself. When you disrupt and they get angry and they come back at you, we have to be able to just maintain inside of that moment. And so restorative practices, I find, is a really good modality to help sort out community problems, right? To help set out family problems, to help set out, we do a lot of work in schools, in education, amongst teachers, amongst superintendents and teachers, amongst teachers and students, amongst all, you know, there's a lot of conflict that goes on in one place inside of a schoolhouse. And we've been successful at finding places in chaos and leaving them in this peaceful way that people know how to talk now and know how to communicate. So I really take a lot of pride in that work, because once I leave, I know I've done something, right? I've done something in a good way to untangle them from the mess that they're in. And then I go back to that time when, you know, I realized that I was, you know, one of the survivors of residential school, right? Of, you know, the 5th generation. Someone helped me untangle that web, right? And I remember asking the people, what do I owe you for doing that? And the only thing they said I owe them is to pay that forward and untangle more webs out there, right? So that's the system that I come from. Those are the people that I come from, right? We have, you know, there's lots of Indigenous folks that are really good at mediation. It's just that their communities don't always give them that opportunity, and it's harder at home than it is away, right? So outside of that, I work in court too. So I work in family court in Ontario. So sometimes Ontario Superior Court or provincial court I work in. It's often amalgamated in the same place. So I find that job, because you're waiting on people that have gone into court, and they're going to come out, and they just have this limited amount of time during the day to boil down these small details about their life. And I quite enjoy that work. I work up in a place called Brantford often, and I see a lot of my own folks up there, right? And one day, the IRC and I were talking about, that position, that mediator position sitting in Brantford, and come to realize that I'm the only person of color ever to sit in that chair in that building, right? And it's been open for a long time. For a long time, it's been open. And that means something, because when my folks open the door and they see me, they see a brown face, you see it settle a little bit. You see them go, okay, like at least, there's somebody here that's going to get what I'm talking about, right? And I really see that as a good thing. I enjoy that work. I enjoy just helping people out of their chaos, if you will, right? Other work I do, I work for the John Howard Society on a part-time basis. And what I do there is I run a program called Intimate Partner Violence, right? So intimate IPV is a program where if you got charged criminally for intimate partner violence, so domestic violence, and it was a couple conditions being one of your first charges and also under kind of a threshold of violence, if you will, right? That you would be eligible to take an 8-week program to go around that charge, to make it go away. So I run that program, and I have, at any point in time, I have 8-10 men, 8 or 10 women that have, this is where their spot, this is where they've been. The whole point of the program isn't to shame them, isn't to blame them. The goal is at the very end, so they understand how is it that this all started, what happened all along the way, what mistake did I make in there, right? And the idea is that I never see them ever again, right? Ever. And you feel that appreciation out of them, because we have to sort this problem out. We could blame you all the way along, bring you to submission at the end to say, yeah, I did it. And I checked the box to say, yep, he admits he did it, right? But you're just going to be mad about it. That's all that's going to happen. And this other way is more time consuming, but it is to work out personally with each individual person about when their mind was in that spot, what was going on, what was happening, what did it remind you of, right? That was the most key. What does it remind you of? Because often people would say, it reminded me of when my dad did it to my mom, right? It reminded me of my mom did it to my dad. So we see the proof in the intergenerational trauma inside of the answers for people about what is wrong, where did it come from? And once you see that, that's the opportunity. It's kind of prime land, if you will, to put somebody in a different path, right? In a different way to get them going down that road. The last thing I do is I'm a Reiki practitioner. So I practice Reiki. I'm an energy practitioner. So I was taught by my Reiki master. Her name's Jane Burning, and she's from Six Nations. And what she did was she combined the practices of Reiki and also the practices of our Haudenosaunee medicine people, right? So we have been practicing the same kind of energy as Reiki for the same number of years, thousands of years, recognizing that we have that ability to take that or manage that energy inside of people, not so much by contact, but by intention, right? So with my Reiki came on training came on the tail of, I was mentored by a lot of my elders, my community, to become a mediator. And one thing they said to me is, you have to go over and learn how to regulate your energy, right? And of course, in the moment, I didn't know what they're talking about. I didn't understand what they're talking about. I said, oh, I can behave. They say, that's not what we're talking about. We don't want you to behave, right? We want you to regulate your energy. So once I took Reiki level 1, and then I went into Reiki level 2. And one of the lessons there was this. And the what she taught us was this, that when you're dealing with somebody and there are some bad things have happened to them, there's bad, and you have to engage with them, to cement in your mind this idea that we're going to put one foot over into the light, we're going to cement it in. We know it's not going to go anywhere. We know our way back to the light. We know it, right? But we can reach into the darkness for as far as we need to. We can stay in there as long as we need to, right? And the whole time, what we're trying to do is convince and coax the person from the darkness over to the light where we can help them better, right? And that was the calmness that they talked about, right? Knowing deep down inside that there's a bigger plan, that this moment in time isn't the most critical, but we do need to keep going, right? It's that ability to split your mind up in a couple different ways for this function and then this function over here. That's what Reiki taught me, right? It taught me to take care of myself too, which wasn't a practice. Self-care amongst mediators, professionals. Listen, we hear the worst. We hear the worst of it. That's what we hear. And after it's done, you turn this off, computer, leave the office. It's you that has to carry on with your life. And the question is, what do you do with this, the stuff that you've just carried, right? And, often we just say, we get rid of it, right? I have a smudge bundle that I use. I have an eagle feather that I use to smudge. I have a cog shell that I use to put my medicines in. And those are my tools that I use to get rid of that darkness, to make that go away and clean the space up so that where we can be there as one, in one mind. So those are my practices. I have my private practice where I'm handling family mediation, child protection, and in community conflicts. I work in family court, handling mediation during some days, and also the intimate partner violence course. That these things are all this is what fills my weeks and fills my months as time goes on. And I also work with at York University as a mentor, and which I find very rewarding for folks. I don't know if you remember, Vikram, when you first became a mediator, right? I remember not just before I became one, before I actually went to go do it, the physical act of even a role play, right? Because you never talked to anybody like that before. You never asked questions hard. Maybe you did, but I didn't. But the point being is that I know the nervousness that sits in that position, right? And well as the other mentors, and we're really good, I feel, that helping folks just get up and over that hump and be, because this mediation job takes courage, right? It takes stamina. It takes that good mind, right? Because if we start thinking negative, it just spirals down out of control, and it's no good, right? I call that, it's the itty bitty shitty committee, right? You got to watch it, monitor it, otherwise it'll take you over, right? So I really and again, the last thing I do is a farmer, right? I grow food. I grow garlic. I grow soft fruits. I have fruit trees, but I don't live in an acreage. I live in a city lot. It's maybe 70 foot by 100 feet deep. I filled the whole back lot with garden. And when I turn this off, when I get done my work here, that's where I go and get my mind right. That's where I go and settle in and go, we're good. We're good right here. So thank you.
That's really interesting. Well, the things that you've covered, I mean, just pointed out right now, I think there's so much to work on that. Like you say, Indigenous Dispute Resolution, that was methodology or whatever model that you've developed. I don't know whether you read about what work I'm doing, but right now my focus is on creating this World Mediation Circle. And in that, we have various circles. So one circle that I'm putting together is the Indigenous Peoples Mediation Circle. So you, of course, have to be part of that, where we take up all this. And then, because for me, I'm saying that, look, these are things which are part of the way we need to, I mean, not just in the informal, okay, let's just do this kind of thing. No, this has to become part of mainstream. I mean, I don't know whether that mainstream is a word used, but mainstream,
No, it's
yes. Yeah, get it
you
into the
know,
mainstream.
and you know, I got a better word for that, and it's dominant society, right? So if you know, for me, look from my perspective, I'm from a reserve, right? My born and raised on a reserve. That is a reserve system set up by Canada. So they took all the Indigenous people and put them all on a reserve, right? When you're over there, okay, and you're looking over into the rest of society, you can clearly see it's dominant, right? So why not call it that?
Yeah.
Dominant society. Now, I have done presentations at universities where professors have gotten mad at me for calling it that, right? Now, my only response was that, you know, labels are harmful, but sometimes useful, right? At least we know what we're dealing with. What is the, you know, I always question this. What is the shame in saying that you are dominant? If you're dominant, just say it, right? If you're dominant, if you want to be dominant, just be dominant and don't be mad when I say you are, right? So that's how I look at the where, you know, to get in this practice into dominant society, right? Which is mainstream. That's the mainstream of things. That's where we want to be. We want to be, you know, that wow, you know, like when people say this problem is impossible, well, call it Vikram and his crew, right? We can solve the world's problems here, right? We can figure something out. There can always be something to figure out before violence happens. So to that end, dominant society is, I think that's the term that we should all use, because that is what is going to get us into mainstream society when you compare the dominance to what your practice is. And I say that because dominant society is strong. It'll run right through you. Whereas this practice over here often is quite limp wrist, right? It's quite passive, right? But we can achieve more through our practices, opposed to being dominant or hard on people. So I very much look at, because I work in dominant society, I hang out with dominant society folks, right? I live, or I work on, and my family lives on the reserve. I live in Hamilton now, outside of the reserve, but I know these both canoes, right? There's a little analogy we like to use sometimes, and it's good for mediation. I want you to think about this for a minute. It's called the Two Row Wampum, right? And a wampum, for all purposes, is this belt that has all these little beads on it, right? And the beads, when you look at them, there'd be a strip of like a white beads, maybe, you know, there'd be like 50 beads inside the white strip, right? Then there's a purple strip, which is the same, white, then purple, then white. And it's that in itself is an agreement. And what the agreement is called the two row wampum, right? So the two row wampum is this. Vikram comes to my land and he walks over the hill, and my clan mother says, go see what he wants, right? And I run up there and I say to Vikram, I say, steno ge, right? Which means, how is your good mind? Now, you won't know what I mean, but this feeling we're going to get beside each other, I'll feel that you're not here to threaten me, that you've come from someplace else because they did something to you there and you just want to be, and that's it, right? Well, our agreement will be this. It'll be the two-row agreement, meaning that I respect your canoe, right? You respect my canoe. If you ever need anything, you can come in my canoe. All I ask is you keep it going straight, right? And I will reciprocate the same way. If we disrupt that process, we're going to make each other's canoes go into the banks. We could sink each other, right? So the idea is that we keep revisiting that two-row wampum between you and I over time to make sure, because I'm not too sure where you came from, the fine details that matter, right? Because fine details matter over here. And you wouldn't know those no more than I would know yours. But if we talk about them, we will find out the fine details and we will mesh, right? We'll be good. That is a two-row wampum. That's the principle. The idea is that we want to make sure that people are in their own canoes, right? Paddle your own canoe. And we can tell when you're in someone else's canoe. We can tell when you're bumping up against their canoe. those analogies, those traditional analogies and those examples, those are how to live our life. That's how to live your life. If you want to know how to live your life, you look at that two-row wampum. Pay attention to your own canoe. You help when you can help, but more importantly, you keep your own canoe floating, because that's what's important. So that's what I look at when I think about I guess we went from dominant society mainstream. I went for a bit of a run there, but the two-row wampum is ultimately it's a good example to help people understand why they should really be minding their own business, and why they should really just pay attention to what's going on in front of them and how that's going. So
yeah. Because I tell you, I'm actually having discussions on areas where I think, of course, call it dominant society and in the mainstream, wherever those discussions around mediation were not happening. One is, of course, for me, heart, soul, spirituality and mediation is a very important part of it. So there was a symposium in April on that topic. So if you get time, please watch some of those sessions. So there we, of course, like you said, about talking about energy, that was one thing that we were talking about there, because those are elements which are not discussed at all. And for me, those are very important aspects in relation to the mediator, the participants and the process. So those are things that we needed to discuss. So we had one discussion on that. Then, of course, this symposium to bring in from various parts of the world practices, which we will take forward. I mean, the thing is, like you said, it is passive because it's been, again, this whole colonization thing comes in, and you've been made to believe that this is not the way to be. What we are telling you is the way to be, which is still happening in the mediation world. And we have to break that out. So we're bringing in support from various parts. So that's what we're going to be doing. And I don't know what your thoughts on the heart, soul, spirituality part of it, please.
Well, the hearts, you think about those words, to me, that is what is going on there, right? Outside the words that we're talking about, you're dealing with somebody's broken heart, right? You're dealing with somebody's broken spirit. You're dealing with these hard things. They're there. So it's like to talk about it and have people put their minds into it, right? Here's just a little side note. When we teach at York with our Chana, one thing I tell the students is this: that you individually have to go deal with what has happened in your life, for this fact that you can only bring people for as far as you've come, right? I can only bring you as far as like I bring you up the edge of the woods going, Vikram, I said, I've never gone this far before. You're on your own here, bud, or we'll find somebody else. And when you start thinking of it like that, and I have thought of it like that, that you start expanding yourself so that there is no end, right? That you're on the front end of things, and you're not waiting for anybody to guide you. You just go do it, right? That's what leadership is. That's what my elders told me leadership was. It was doing things that are so scary that nobody else would do, but you do it. You do it. You do it for your people, and that's really what it's about. It's there's many challenges in this. One in the healing modality, the healing. One thing we do, I'm not too sure if you guys do this there, but we do what's called a 4-day fast. I don't know if people fast all around the world, I'm sure, but our fast, it's a very specific thing that goes on. So the very first day or the night before, you have a sweat, right? So we have a sweat lodge, and that sweat lodge, we take these grandfathers, we call them. They're big, thick rocks, right? Grandfathers, because you and I are minerals, right? When we boil all down in 1,000 years, they'll find Vikram and Jim piled up in a little pile of minerals together, and that'll be us, right? Our spirit's gone, but we're minerals. Well, that mineral is a grandfather. That's a valuable entity right there, right? So we take that and we heat it up in a fire all day. So imagine building a pyramid of grandfathers, putting wood all the way around it and lighting on fire, and it's this big bonfire. Well, by the end of the day, it starts burning down. And what you have is a whole collection of white glowing rocks, right? Burning, they're hot. So we pass, say, 20 at a time There's 4 rounds, so there'll be 80 rocks in there at the end. We pass 20 rocks into the sweat, and inside the middle of the sweat, there's a hole in the ground. We put the grandfathers in there. Then what we do is we will sing to the grandfathers, we'll pray to the grandfathers, and we'll take our cedar water or medicine water and we'll pour it in on top of the grandfathers, and the steam will come up, right? And it's hot. It's really, really hot. And the idea is that that's how life presses up on you, right? What you do in that heat matters, right? We've seen some people fall to the ground and start crying because it's too much. The sweat is designed to show you where you are, right? And if you can sit there and withstand that heat and that pressure, sing those songs and be with it, that's where you're touching right to who we call Songwendiso, our creator. You're right with them in that moment in time, right? And the preceding 4 rounds, they just get hotter and hotter and hotter as time goes on. And by the end of it, you really come into this spiritual place, this place where you can feel the goodness of it, that because you shed all the negativity out of you, right? This is what's gone on in the sweat. It's extracted all the negative aspects, all the toxins, and we're looking at each other as pure individuals. And then afterwards we feast, right? We feast, and then the next day is when you start your fast. You go in the woods with a lean-to, a tarp, and a sleeping bag, a knife, and some matches, and you're on your own for the 4 days. And what they told us was that you're going to go through, and just like we know of any fast, your body starts breaking down, your mind becomes a little bit lucid, all these things. But they're saying on the 3rd day, right? On the 3rd night, last night, just before dawn, okay, just before the sun came up, you're going to hear footsteps. You're going to hear crunch, 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 crunch towards your lean-to. If you get up and run, if you get scared, those footsteps are going to run away, right? But if you don't, it'll stay with you, right? Now, I'm not Ojibwe, but they're Ojibwe. That's who I did it with. In their prophecy, they had a little boy that fell from the sky world. And that little boy had everything they needed here on earth, all the seeds, all the knowledge, everything they needed. And that is their prophet. That's the prophet of, because that young boy was raised in the village and he would tell them what was what, and they followed him after a while. So the idea is that if you're afraid, that little boy will see you as being too afraid to be with, right? And that's the lesson right there. And at the end of it all, I made it out of there, and they give me this right here. I just want to show you this. Can you see that?
Yeah.
It's a little beaded boy, right? And what it was that what they explained to me is they give me that, and they said, this is the little boy that you rescued inside of you, right? You made him whole. You made him attached to you, right? All this work you did. And if anything ever happens to him, fragile he is, his arms are skinny, anything ever happens, bring him back and we'll know how to put him back together, right? And for all purposes, that's my whole health plan. This is my whole health plan. As long as I take care of that little boy, right? I'm fine. I'm more than fine. And this has been going on for a little bit of time. This has been 15 years of this, right? I'm 15 years out from this healing. I'm reminded of this little boy all the time. I bring this little boy everywhere I go to show other folks that they can get that little boy or girl out too, right? Because when we got traumatized as children, we didn't realize that in fact, that spirit stayed there and we grew up, right? And then we just grow up and up. And then we sit there and think back ourselves. We think, have we ever seen adults act like teenagers, right? Have we ever seen adults act like 10-year-olds? Have we ever seen adults act like 5-year-olds? All of it, yes, because that's when the trauma happened. And that's where your spirit got stuck right there, right? And to bring that knowledge to people, to help them understand that you can go back, retrieve that little boy or girl, bring them to safety, and create new. That's real. That's as real as it gets right there. So,
yeah, well, interesting. I think these are things which we need to bring out. So that's what we will do. We'll try and bring out all this aspect because of the fact that, look, even in India, a lot of things, of course, luckily, I think we were a much larger country and
yeah,
so we could handle a lot of things and a lot of practices, of course, remained.
yep,
Although in the educational system and all those they did not form part of that. So obviously what was retained was out of that. But of course, I mean, we need to, I mean, I'm saying that the younger generation
yep.
still has stayed away from it. A lot of things which are very, I mean, very, really strong, important things that they could have followed and should have followed did not happen. So we have to bring that out. But from the dispute resolution also, there is so much that we have to be able to bring out there, which is what we are going to be doing as part of that circle. So that is really important. And the other thing that you said about the fact that mediators going through and carrying a lot with them, I think a lot of people don't understand that. I mean, maybe that's why they don't value mediators the way they should. There is a lot happening there on the mediator's end, which never gets discussed because the mediator is not sitting and discussing that with you.
Do you know if we drag the average person off the street and just said, listen, I need you to listen. I got 10 cases lined up here, right? 10 appointments. If I said, you got to just sit there they wouldn't make it past 2 or 3. They'd be like, you know what? I can't do this. Get me out of here. And that's what you're talking about, the appreciation of what we do here, right? It's something that I had to prepare for. Let's put it this way. I graduated engineering. I didn't have to prepare to go and do that field. I didn't have to prepare I just got some education, but I didn't have to prepare myself in a way that was going to be taxing on me. They said, go over that construction site. You went over there, you put the hard helmet on, the vest on, and you were there. That's what happened, right? But, this profession, it needs more, right? And I don't know your partner situation, but my partner, Emily, she helps run my business here, right? She is very much the coordinator of all the appointments and bios being sent out and all that stuff. She checks in, and because she knows about my healing and she's engaged in hers too, we do check-ins to see how was that for you, right? I'm talking to a young lady that was, sexually abused. She was young, 14 years old, and had a whole bunch of problems, right? That's a lot to take on. And so to talk about, to have somebody later on to go, hey, is it okay? Are you okay? That's really what we need. The talkers need to talk to somebody. But we also have mentors, right? I have some really good mentors that I could call up any time of day, really, to say, hey, listen, this is what's going on and I don't know what to do. And I have confidence they would have some kind of answer to go forward. So, you sit in confidence like that, where you think at a point in time, there is no answer that can elude you, because it isn't just you have other people that can help move this along. So that's kind of where I've landed in time and space. But I do see that need for us mediators to talk about what is happening, what is it you're experiencing, and are you okay, right? Are you okay? Because what they're asking you to do is a lot.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I mean, of course, you make it easy because, of course, people actually at the end of the day think that, okay, they did it, and what was the mediator really doing? And that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's it, right? That's it.
No, not realizing that what all you did. I mean, just the fact that whatever you took from there and how you handled it. So, I did start a series called Mediator Reflects, which I'll develop because there's Michael Lang who works on reflective practice. We'll have some groups that we'll make. So all that activity,
Yeah.
there was a whole series of events which was happening. So now the focus is on that mediation circle and all these people, and then we'll do things together in terms of groups and all that. But the important thing that you also said was in terms of time consuming. That certain processes are time consuming, and over time, I think that aspect of his has got left out. Okay, I hear about people talking about mediation, and within that day we have to do this, we have to do that. No, it's not about. There's so much more with in terms of that connection, that relationship, and understanding, going backwards. So I think that part of it, I think we also need to bring out that look, this whole time aspect of it cannot be a factor in relation to resolution. Definitely, a court system would want that. Please, let's keep it as a different world. There is another world that you need to create. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I think the idea of, and you're talking about creating a, like a union of sorts, right? Of all people that we do this, and we're, right away, my thoughts are, I think this is excellent. Right from when I got your email to say this is what's going on, I've looked along the way. I'm thinking these are all things that's dancing inside of my head, right? I talked to a client about it. The client isn't going to go out to this symposium and go, "Oh, this is what I learned." Blah, blah, blah. So for all purposes, a lot of our practices are closed off, right? They're over here someplace. You don't hear them. You don't get to see them. Us all getting together is, to me, is that's the dream, right? That's really is what it's about, because we're trying to fix the same problems, right? And I don't want to lead right back to colonization again, but that is the thing that plagues us all, right? More often than not, when I boil everything down, I go, whoa, that is what it is right there. We all see it, right? And it's happened in India, it's happened in Canada, it happened in the States, it happened, all around the world, Australia, New Zealand. It's the same. And you're right, the impacts on us and you would have been different, because there's a lot more of you than us, right? I'm just saying, there's these guys are in the billions, right? We're capping up at 1 million type of thing, right? 1.5 million. So, but it's still affected, right? And we have to untangle this web, and the more people that know about how we untangle it, will engage in it, right? I imagine a day, because I always tell my clients this when we get done and we have an agreement. They're usually in treatment someplace that I got them into, right? But I tell them, I'm saying, tell everybody, tell all your friends, tell all your family what happened. Just tell them, right? Tell them what happened. And some have, right? Some have here and there. But I figure that's the way. It's so different if someone came back in your family, right? And you hadn't seen them in a while, you knew they're in trouble, and they sat down and they go, look, this is what happened. This is what I did. This is what I had to do. I am changed in that way. Now, there's going to be initial people saying, oh, that's not real, blah, blah, blah. But the reality of the day is that story will be in your family now, right? And the key is to get that story in your family. Because in my family, the only story that was in there was the traumatized story. That was the only stories that we told, right? And for me, I was the first person in my family to go heal, right? My mother, I remember coming back to her and saying, they told us about residential school. They told us all about this. And she said to me, she says, I didn't think anyone would ever care about that, right? Like, she was in there from age 3 till about 12. And her brothers and sisters were all in there through various times. And you thought that no one cared about it. You just thought it was something that happened way back, and it was done, and we're just going to be done. It turned out it was one of the biggest things in our family that we never ever talked about. So now that is in our family discussion. That is a thing that we talk about. And I had to be on the front end of that. It's scary. It's scary because you have a whole bunch of family pulling back, saying, no, don't look into that. There's nothing over there. Don't worry about it. When the reality today is, at the base of your soul that is the answer, right? You've been searching for an answer your whole life. It's sitting right in front of you, and you have to do the work to get it, right? That's the answer. So,
but the thing is, Jim, that of course, I mean, you said residential schools, a lot of people would not know about this at all. So, and because there is so much, if you really want to, I mean, as much as you want to, you're okay with talking about, I think we should put it out there. We should put it out there.
Sure. So residential schools are a system that was set up by the Crown, right? So before Canada became Canada as an entity, there was the British Crown that was here, right? So we go back for a history with the British Crown to, let's go back to the War of 1812, right? So come the War of 1812, the Americans were pressing hard, the English were pressing back, and they turned to us, the Haudenosaunee, and they say, hey, help us out, and we will, we'll keep land aside for you up here, right? And amongst us, we sat there and said, okay, you know what are our options here? If we don't help them, those other guys are just going to kill us too, right? Type of thing. So essentially what we did was we sided with the British. We fought in the War of 1812. We drove the Americans back. There's a famous story of the last battle at Queenston Heights, they call, where the Americans were coming up the hill in the thousands. And what they sent through was a nighttime raid. And what they sent through were, they say, 100 Mohawks, right? So me being Cayuga, there's Mohawks in the Haudenosaunee clan. And they sent 100 Mohawks through the woods, screaming and yelling. And that was enough to drive the American forces back, because they believed we were the devil, right? They were afraid of us. We were fierce. We were warriors, right? And that was the last stand right there. So the idea is we have this great relationship now. I saved your bacon, and you're like, thanks, Jim. I'll never forget that, right? Well, as time went on, right, the issue of land comes up into play, where, and I'll take my own community, Six Nations, where around 1910 or so, there was a push by the, and it was Canada by that point, by the federal government, to start building infrastructure, right? Now, they wanted to build something called the Welland Canal. And the Welland Canal would connect up the Great Lakes up. Ultimately, you can go around the world if you go through these locks and get to a place. And basically what they wanted to do is they took our land to do it, because it was our land, right? And then they had something else. They had a trust fund set up through this Grand River Navigation Company that used to operate on our territory as well. So imagine back in the turn of the century, there's like $1 million sitting someplace, right? It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money back in the day. It's a lot of money today, but it's more money back then. They took that money and they built institutions like the Welland Canal. They built the University of Toronto. They built the University of Montreal or Concordia in Montreal with our money, right? And they didn't pay us back. And then once we start pressing up against that and really getting angry about it, they basically came in and they raided the traditional government, took them out, and put in an elected system in 1924. They say 55 people were there to vote. They voted in a council in chief, and then from that day forward, there's been conflict in our community. Where residential schools came in was during these times when they saw our opposition to them and they couldn't get to us. So they went underneath and they took our kids, right? They took our kids. They put Mounties in our communities with outposts, guns, right? And then slowly they started this residential school system starting in about 1890, I'll say, ramping up huge in the 1920s, right? Becoming mainstream through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and ultimately closing in 1970. Pardon me, I was born in 1971. If I was born a year earlier, I would have been in that residential school, right? So the idea is that they, to have bring us down, right? They would bring us in there, and then the residential school system. My mom, my uncles all went to. It was an atrocious thing, in a sense where if you came in speaking your language, they would literally beat you until you spoke English, right? You have a fine ponytail there, Vikram, right? We will wear the same, in the power of that hair is our power. You know, that's your tradition, you feel that too. Well, imagine someone going snip, right? That'd be a hard day right there. Because that's you who you are. And that's who we were. We are the braiding process for our hair. Our women would braid her hair to send us out for good luck, right? These are all part of something. So all of a sudden you cut that off and you can't speak that language anymore. You can't do that ceremony anymore. You can't do this. You can't, and they just wore them down over time. And essentially, at a point in time, they really believed they had just really just beaten us down, right? To the point we were now annihilated. And that wasn't the case, because the spirit that lives inside of us to restore our confederacy, restore our Haudenosaunee territory, it's real. That heartbeat beats strong, right? People still live and think that way, and are willing to shift over to a traditional way, maybe not in the actual whole functioning of life, but more importantly, in the way we think and talk to each other, right? We hold up a standard and say, look, you will talk to each other in a restorative way. If you don't, we're going to go figure out what is wrong, right? That is the way we ran our communities. That's the way it went, right? If you came to my community, we know each other, you just came to visit, you could do that. You come to the protocol would be, you come to the edge of the woods, you built the fire, someone says someone's up there, I go running up, it's my boy Vikram, right? Skin old gay, how you doing? I'm doing good. He's like, come on down. The whole idea is that when I bring you down, I'm responsible for your good mind. I'm responsible, right? This guy gets out of line, they're not going to come after him. It's me, right? Because then they're going to question me, right? It isn't, they know you're not right away, but then more importantly, they're questioning me because I'm the one that brought you down there, right? So the residential school system really looked to destroy any concept that we had about being as one, right? Being that whole entity, being whole. But that has lived on, and we have this ability to go back in time to find out what those instructions are and come forward. And more people are waking up to that on a regular basis as we go forward. So.
But in relation to dispute resolution, I mean, those methods and everything, all that stayed intact. I mean, how did that? What changes happened there, or what did you keep there?
So there's something that happened with being Haudenosaunee, and I can go way back to something. It's called the Indian raids, they called it, right? Going back to history-wise, George Washington. You familiar with who that is? George Washington. He was one of the presidents of the United States of America, right? Well, he was not a nice man. He was quite an evil man. And what he determined was that he couldn't get rid of us. He was mad at us. We were his obstacle. So he really figured out what it was. What our strength was this. We had stockpiled 1 million bushels of corn, bean, and squash. 1 million, right? Like a mountain of corn, bean, and squash, right? We had dried fruits, all the stuff we needed, herbs, everything we needed around. All our ceremony stuff was made from things that are out in nature, right? You got hides, you got wood, you got different metals that we could cultivate and find. They raided us in order to destroy all that. They weren't looking for us; they were looking for that. And in that moment in time, as a nation, when we gathered, we knew it was coming. People were given bundles, okay? Bundles of seed, bundles for ceremony, bundles for everyday life, just our things we used. And with instruction, the instruction was to run and to hide until it was safe, right? And that's essentially what we did. We ran and hid for a long time until it was safe. And I say that it's only been safe for us for approximately 30 years, right? That's what we're looking at of safety, that we have our own space now, that we don't have that big a threat. And it goes bigger than that. Our chiefs in assembly, right? When there's all of them sitting in the one spot, there's 50 of them in total, right? And the 50th person is called Tatadaho. Tatadaho is the leader of all the chiefs, right? There's a long history to Tatadaho where they had brought him to his good mind. He was the evilest amongst us, right? But he was most knowledgeable amongst us. So helping save his good mind brought him into a place where he could just give us his honesty and be the decision maker we need, right? And there's been a Tatadaho since the beginning of time, going back thousands of years, He always comes from what was called the pardon me, I should get this right, Onondaga Nation, right? So he's always from the Onondaga Nation. And that Taktadaho, during that time of the Washington raids, basically they made up a rule, and they said this, that we can never let anybody know if all 50 chiefs are in assembly, because they will try to hurt us, right? And the only way we will all know if we're all together is they're going to sing this fifth song, they call it, right? And they're going to sing it in its entirety. If they stop on this last verse, you know they can't tell you everybody's here. That's how intricate. And they talk about safety. It's not safe, right? So I have personally heard that fifth song in its entirety twice in my life. But when you look around, you can't tell who is who. You get me? You're just who you are, and they all know who they are. And that's all that's important, because we put that trust in those chiefs. I don't say, oh, they should tell me. I understand why they don't tell everybody, right? They have to keep that to themselves. It's important, because if that falls, that's the rest of us. That's the rest of us are gone too, right? That's our nation. That is the thing that we have hung on to for thousands of years. We must protect it. So.
But in relation to the younger generation, I mean, are they being taught certain things? Do we still have that knowledge base available, or have we lost a lot of it?
No, the knowledge base is still there. Those that ran and hid, they ran and hid well, and they taught their families. They passed on stuff. When my grandma passed away, under the bed in the suitcase. Everybody has that, right? You open that up, and inside of that were these seeds, right? These bean seeds, and they were red with some black markings on them. I've never seen them before, right? And I took them to some elders, and they said, "You're hanging on to something here. You're hanging on to something, right? This is part of it right here." And I plant them, and they grew, and I had more seeds. So that's how, with respect to the youth, there's a lot more programming now in the community to help bring people back to those traditional ways of things and doing, right? I do a lot of work in schools. I mentioned before, restorative practices. We go into schools, we talk to kids about how is your good mind, how is this, and if you had that conversation 30 years ago, people might not have known what you're talking about. You get me? Because it was obscure. It wasn't, there wasn't a lot out there. It is more mainstream today inside of the community to talk about traditional things and activity. And again, kids are now showing up with their traditional names, right? They're not called Jim Doxtdator. They're called, Taktadaho. They're called, Songondisi, these kind of names. And that's when you see it really taking shape, right? Because people are living it, right? They're living the reality of their life. They're entitled to a name in the longhouse. They got the name, and they're going to spend the rest of their life learning all the ceremonies and passing those on to the next. That's your obligation. And then one day they might tap you to become a clan mother, a seer. They might tap you to become a chief. They might tap you to become a clan mother, right? These are all the roles that we have in our longhouses. That why they're saying is to carry yourself with a good mind. Don't worry about what is. When you carry yourself with a good mind, they'll find you and put you and get you to what needs to be to help the whole nation run, right? And that's the spot we're in now. It's a rebuilding phase for all purposes. There's still an elected council system in town, and it is up against the traditional system of government. And there's got to be solutions we can find in there that will stop the violence that keeps on happening inside of our community due to one side picking the side of the colonizer and going against its own traditional people. So.
But I couldn't find your traditional name, your spirit name anywhere. I had to do. I had to do my research on my own because you had taken a break. So.
No, it's okay. I don't have one. I've not gone to get my traditional name. I've gone to the longhouse, I go to the ceremonies, I do a lot of things. But, there's a thing where I don't feel I know enough yet to get that name. And I know that might sound, I think, but that's just me. And I will in time. But there's a time for that. And I feel that coming. So, but for anyone else who wants to get, I encourage them to go through the steps, go through the process to do what you have to do. But not everybody has it all the time. Not everybody is raised. I wasn't raised the traditional way for 35 years of my life, right? I just stepped into it. And then, the spiritual aspect of it was the most important to really grab onto and to be with. That's what being Haudenosaunee is all about. It's having a good mind, being thankful for every little thing. Before we get, I do this opening, we call it opening prayer before I get going on a training or something like this. And essentially what it is it walks us through all the things we're supposed to be thankful for and a reminder. And it's something I do every morning before I wake up and go about my day. And it's simple. We turn our minds, we are thankful towards our brothers and sisters, right? Just be thankful toward them. Because you know what? If you walk around and you're mad at your brothers and sisters, damn it, that's no way to be, right? That's no way to be. It's why borrow that grief? Why do that? So the lesson in there is to look at each other with admiration, with love, and if once you sit in that position, and I don't have to be mad at you, that's my energy now over here, right? The next is we give thanks to our grandmother, the moon, right? And we call our grandmother the moon's a grandmother, and she looks over us, right? She's so powerful. She brings the tides in, she brings the tides out, right? She'll shift the weather. She'll all these things that moon will do for us to give us that hope, right? We turn our minds to our brother, the elder, the sun, right? And that's our oldest brother that we looked at, and he shines down on us and gives us that heat and gives us that warmth and that security that we need. We're thankful for that, right? We turn our mind, we give thanks to the birds and the trees and the bushes and all the fruits and all the vegetables that grow in the world. Those gives us sustenance. That is what sustains us, right? We always have to be thankful for that, right? We give thanks to the four-legged beings. We give thanks to the birds, and we really go. These prayers can last hours, okay, hours and hours. And if you think about it, if you start giving thanks to every single thing you know, and think about seeds, every single seed you knew, right? You would give thanks to that. That's where we sit. And then finally, we give thanks to our mother, the earth, right? That she gives us everything we need. Everything is there that we need. We're born from her. We'll go back to her, right? And we're going to give her thanks for hanging on to our elders, right? Hanging on to the faces to come, right? Giving thanks for all that. And when we sit in gratitude, it changes things. It changes it, right? If we're sitting in this gratitude and all of a sudden you say, well, Jim, what do you think of this? I said, I complain about it. I don't think that's shit. I think it's terrible. Well, you're going to see that I'm not sitting in gratitude, am I? You're not a grateful person. You're pretty mad about that. Like, it matters. It matters how we come across to other people, and it matters how we treat ourselves. Because if I'm not sitting in gratitude, I'm sitting in pain, right? And why would I do that to myself? Why would I take a spoonful of poison just because I'm mad at you, right? It makes no sense. And when it isn't until you start talking it out with people that you can really get them to a place where they understand that. And I ask them to put it all down and walk away.
Yeah. I think these are important things which should not be lost. Anything. Luckily, like you said, these are there. That whole knowledge base is there, hasn't gone. But in relation to mediation, in relation to any practices that you have to take us through, and also I keep saying that there is just the role of the mediators. One is mediation itself and the role of the mediators in relation to how conversations happen within the community, how the leaders behave, leaders as mediators, all that side. You have to take us through that.
So, I'd like to say that in our communities that we're all on board for this process, right? And, there's some people in our communities that, it's like almost like this. If I start asking all these questions and you even knew the questions, you would get nervous around here because you know where we're going to land, right? So in our communities, there's a lot of apprehension, right? There it isn't this willingness. I'm not going to paint this utopia over here where we're all engaging in this process at all. No, not even close. There's very few of us that are actually engaged in it, that live this life, and there's others that bump up against it from time to time, right? And we gather more and more people as time goes on, but the majority of people are not on board for this kind of activity, right? Now, with that said, I'm going to go to a community that I was just working in, and I'll give you an example. So I came into a school dispute, right? And it was in the community, a First Nation community. And, I got a call from HR and they're saying it's a big fight. We don't know what to do. It's bad, right? So I go in and it's an older fella. He's been hired recently to become the director of education, right? So he is probably into his 60s, right? For 30 years before then, he had worked out in dominant society, as a principal, as a superintendent, all those good things up there. So then you come back home, right? And, I'm not too sure. It's just almost like you might experience this back home where, in the big city center, right? The way business goes, how high pace everything goes, that's the way everyone's established that. But then you come back to the village, right? And things aren't quite that advanced, right? They're not quite in that spot where everybody is knowledgeable about everything. So essentially, I went and talked to the principal who said there's a dispute, the superintendent and the HR. And what it was that the new superintendent guy coming in was essentially browbeating the old principal, right? Saying that's not how we did things at this school board. That's not how we did things at this school board, and criticizing down to the point where he was trying to get him fired, right? So imagine being in a position for 10 years. I show up for 9 months, and in 9 months, I'm putting the run to you, right? You're going to do something adverse. You're going to record me or something. And that's what happened. He recorded him. And then he recorded him. He went and said the contrary to the CEO and HR. He come back to the recording and said, look, he's lying about me. I want something done about this, right? And, you have to confront these folks at this point in time. That was my job. And you get into a position where in the community, I'm dealing with the CEO of the community, the HR, and these folks, and they're all related, okay? They're all related. They're all connected somehow or another. And I'm coming back to them saying, look, the superintendent doesn't care about what he says to this principal. And matter of fact, he doesn't even think he did anything wrong, right? And they said, well, what do you think we have to do with him? And I said, well, one of two things. Either he owns what happened and accepts to get a mentor, or else you have to let him go, right? One of those two things. Because if he stays here, he is going to alienate 4 or 5 more of your staff that have been here forever, and you're going to end up with nobody except for him, right? Now, inside of the community, this is a dilemma, because it is a dilemma. I'm going to be coming to you saying, listen, Vikram, you got to fire your cousin and your brother, okay? Yeah, you're like, you don't want to do that. So inside of the community, they got me to do it, right? They get me to do it because they don't want to do it because it'll cause too much pain. That just look at that stepped outside of my role as a mediator, right? I'm when I started taking action, I'm not the mediator anymore, am I? Right? Now I justify saying I'm simply delivering a message from up top to you, and this is what we're going to talk about. Here's your options, and he didn't want to take it, right? So when we look at our communities and think, all these resources are available and people can get this conflict, there's a lot holding us back from that point, and that goes back into there's a phrase that Dr. Bob Anton Cat and Dr. Rick Hill coined, and it's called ethno stress. Okay, it's a stress across our people right from the beginnings, the first time we saw not us, right? First time we saw somebody not us, which is about middle of 1400s, right? The Dutch come walking over the hill, and we didn't know who they were, but we made friends with them. We had a relationship for like 300 years. Those guys spoke our language, right? I'm saying. And we figured that out. When colonization took place, it broke all that up, right? It broke all that up. The point to ethno-stress is this, that pressure on us has gone, at times it's been great, tremendous. It's gone down, but it's never been zero, right? It's never been zero. On either end, it's always elevated and there's always something. That's the ethno-stress that as Indigenous people, once we realize we're in it, you can act against it, right? You can act against it. And I find it to be a very valuable analogy to help people understand where it is you're sitting, right?
But how much is the ethno-stress now?
Well, the ethno-stress is just as great as it was in residential school. Do you know that there's more children in care today than there were in residential schools back in through all the years? So they just shifted, right? They shifted. And I'm going to go a short story about my own family and that 60s scoop. So I have a brother. I have a half brother. He's not. I don't call him a half brother. He's my brother. So at the end of the day, he's got a different father. So my mother, when she left residential school, she got pregnant at the age of 14, right away. And for what they did to her in there, nobody would say. People would say, "Wow, I see why that happened." Right? They abused my mother. They hurt her really, really bad in there, to the point where she had to go and find her own pain, right, through life. Now, she's 15. They find out she's pregnant. They take her to Hamilton, put her into what they call a convalescent home, where for mothers that unwed mothers basically, and the same nuns that were in Brantford were at that home, right? And they browbeat her for 9 months, and basically when the baby was born, they said, we're going to take him and get him cleaned, and they took him, right? Now, interesting story over here in Canada, during the 60s and late 60s and 70s, a lot of rich white people adopted Indigenous children into their families, right? The Trudeaus adopted an Indigenous child. His name was Sasha. He died back 20 years ago. But one of the other people were these folks called Murray and Barbara Frum, right? Now, they were folks from Toronto. He was a dentist originally, he became a land developer. Barbara Frum was a broadcaster on the CBC, right? And they were Jewish people, right? And they adopted my brother Matthew, right? And they adopted him. Now, we didn't know that was the case. We didn't know who that he went to, nothing. Now, 20 years later, I meet back up with Matthew. We get to connect, right? I never met him before. I didn't know who he didn't even know he existed, right? And he told me about that experience there. And he said basically that at a point in time, they just determined that they could not manage him anymore. And they sent him away. They sent him to, he went to Upper Canada College for a while. He went to different colleges here and there. But that nurturing was never there, right? And I always think to myself, I wish I could go back in time and just go back in that living room with those and see young Matthew there and just say, let's just do a restorative process here quick to figure out what we need. And I can't help but feel that that is what would have been needed for him. Now, I've told him that story, and both of us wish that we were with each other. And the reality is where both of us was horrible, right? It wasn't a good situation. But we're together now and we're in a good situation. So, this 60 scoop, the way people look at things is complicated. It's a very complicated thing. And with that said, there were some non-Indigenous families that adopted Indigenous children that were successful at it, right? They nurtured the culture, they nurtured the child. Opposed to, I say, sometimes when you get a child, if you adopted them for vanity reasons or for other reasons other than genuine, you're going to get what you get, right? And unfortunately for Matthew, that's what his experience was in 60 Scoop. So, I carry all these thoughts and memories with me when I talk to my clients, because the same thing comes up every day. Every day I talk to a new Matthew every day, all the time, right? Somebody who's been taken out of their community as a child, brought back, and doesn't know where to be or how to be. These are the problems that plague us over here on our side, right? That we don't, quite honestly, don't know how to deal with.
Definitely. I mean, these are things that, I mean, no one really knows how to deal with them. There's so much happening there internally. So I don't know. Of course, it'll take its time. It still take its time. But in relation to, I will still be interested to know in various aspects of the community, where is mediation being used and the mediators being used, both aspects. Is there anything else that is happening there?
Yep. In the community, and I say in communities because I work in many communities, right? That mediation is being utilized for workplace conflicts, right? That's the big thing in First Nation communities. We have a term there, we say that we eat our own, right? We eat our own, meaning that the anger sits inside of us. We can't get to out there. We just turn it inward, right? And we just consume each other, right? So lost my thought for a second. What was the word? What was the point I just made? If you can help me out.
But you use it in workplace.
Workplace. So we go into workplaces, and conflicts in workplaces are, and especially in First Nation communities, that people are related, right? People are married. People are involved in each other's lives. And all of a sudden you come over to this other place where I'm your boss and you're, but over here, you're more dominant in the family. Those dynamics play out. So restorative practices both help individuals see what it is going on, but more importantly, upstairs, right? For HR and for CEOs, it's not that we disclose what goes on in the mediation, but more so it was successful or it wasn't. And here's where the problems are, right? So you're really not disclosing because this is your own information you're driving from, right? So when I the HR folks, they really appreciate it because prior to this, they've not been able to dig into why, right? This apprehensive why, but you have to call in a stranger to ask why, right? Because I'm not related to you. I'm not, and this isn't my problem, right? But I'm familiar with problems and I'll talk to you about it. So that's workplace is big. That's a really big thing. Schools, restorative practices in schools, whether it's conflict resolutions, whether it's school trainings, there's a really, exercise we've done in classes to start straighten things out. It's called community or non-community. And essentially we ask you, have you ever been treated non-community and how did you feel? And then how did you act? We asked the same thing about have you felt community? How did you feel? How did you act? And imagine a list of 25 students of feeling and acting, good and bad, all the way down. We point to it, we say that is community, non-community in this class. And when problems happen, we're going to go back to those feelings and look to those actions to see what it was. Do you know, if you go into a classroom where there's full out conflict going on, in weeks, it goes down. The minute people realize that you could be pinpointed down to like, Vikram, why did you do that to him, right? We know it was you. You don't want to be in that position. Instinctually, you just know to pull back, right? Well, that's essentially what the schoolwork is helping kids understand that our actions impact on others. And if we don't want them to do that to us, then we can't do that to them. And you're finding balance in the school, right? The other is training for child protection agencies, for social agencies around. The training in restorative practices we do is quite effective, right? It's training enough that you can be on the road to become a restorative practitioner, right? A modality of mediation. To me, that was my gateway into mediation. That's how I learned first, through restorative practices. And the trainings, again, for all the professional staff, and then also inside of the workplaces, doing that restorative practice training inside of there. It doesn't matter if it's OW, it doesn't matter, Ontario Works, pardon me, like a welfare. It doesn't matter if it's the school, it doesn't matter if it's the daycare, the library, it doesn't matter. A restorative space can be built up and people can maintain it. And that's essentially what we deliver, right? And if you have trouble with it, you give me a call, I'll come back, we'll straighten it out, and we'll keep going straight. We have success with that. That's real. You know, places where there was chaos before, we walk in, we do the work, and we just calm everything down and make everything go. That's what makes me sleep at night. That's helped me sleep at night, that right there. So those kind of four big aspects of training, schools, workplaces, and then, you know, the community work, the actual cases themselves, inside of communities. That's where I'm at. And it's the same consistent message, right? Same consistent message being, you know, we come to our good mind, but we got to look at the trauma, all these things. And you notice that in a community, say not my community away, right? I go in there and I'm going to talk to, say, 20 people, say in the course of 3 weeks, right? And I don't come back, say, for another 2 weeks after that. Then when I came back, I know you all talked. I know you all talked, right? That's good. That's what I wanted. You weren't talking before. I came to make you talk, right? And those are good feelings when you get to do that, because some of those things haven't happened in 50 years, right? Some people hadn't talked in that long. And on that day, you said enough words to get everybody talking.
Which is a very important role, which actually, like I said, sometimes doesn't get valued because it just happened. And how did it happen? Everyone, of course, doesn't understand what the mediator brought in. I mean, just maybe one sentence somewhere, one little word somewhere got it going, and it just happened. I mean, but you knew which one to use, which sentence to use. That's
Yeah, you do know what sentences you use, because again, you work in this field. You do see odd things every now and again, new, right? But there's a pattern. There's a pattern going on, right? And people, especially live in the same geographic area, they went to the same schools, their parents are all. No, that's what the ethno stress is, right? That's what it is. It's like saying that you were all living. It's like if people were all living in Hiroshima, right? I'm saying, and they all had this one common problem. And someone's like, I don't know what it was. I point out and go, well, listen, someone dropped a bomb on you, and that probably caused a big part of it, right? That was the major contributor to it. Well, individual First Nation communities or any one place deserves that same kind of explanation, because bombs have been dropped on all those places, maybe not in the literal sense, but in some sense, a huge disruption has happened. And we have a hard time coming back. And I use this analogy and think about this. If there was 5 of us sitting around in a circle, just having our conversation, talking, nothing major going on, just this is what's going on. All of a sudden, a bomb dropped in the middle of us. Not enough to kill us, just enough to fly us back, hit the wall a little bit, roll a little bit. Whew. When we get back to that circle, do you know that we'll have 5 different stories? 5 different ones, right? Someone will already believe that it's something else going on. And then somebody will be afraid not to agree with them and go along with them to make it look like that. These are realities in our world, right? I've seen this firsthand. I've seen it in my life. I've seen it in my family. I've seen it in my clients. It is imperative that we talk about that bomb. And I need to hear how it all felt, how you all felt, what you thought about at the time, what you thought about since, and what do we need to do to make things right here, right? Let's just get that sense of hanging on to it, that if something inside of you is really afraid, if somebody says, let's make this right, that's what you grab onto right there.
So that's the connection you can make, because of obviously with your own experience, you can understand where people are coming from. So I think that's really important. But in relation to your restorative practice as such, maybe we'll have to have one discussion whenever on how you go about that and how restorative practice versus mediation and of course
Yep.
role of mediators in restorative practice. Both those aspects also need to be discussed, because I think sometimes there is I mean, people cannot distinguish between the mediation and restorative practice and what that distinguishing aspect is. So you want to throw a little light on it right now, and then we can take it up sometime else, or whatever your wish.
Sure. So the IDR process is an ancient process, right? It's a process that for us, we have practiced for thousands of years. Our curiosity and finding about what happened get you into the healing that you need. If there's accommodation that's needed, then we all know that and we can manage it, right? But it's when we don't know, and you're in the community, you have these needs or this way you're being, and I don't know why you're acting that way. I don't know how to deal with you. I don't know how to, that's where the chaos starts, right? What we're saying is that if you start asking everybody when the problem comes, go right away to what happened, right? You know, tell us the story. And in there, we're facilitating their story with them, right? So for instance, you know, we hear stories about stuff, and someone might tell a passive story that means more than what they're saying, right? You know, type of thing where someone says, you know, well, you know, my grandpa used to beat me quite a bit, but you know, life was okay, and we just kind of went on with stuff, right? Whoa. Let's talk a little more about that, right? So it's just dragging people back to that place where they're happy about glazing over, right? And you're saying, pull back here. We need to talk about this. So in the IDR, there's a lot of challenging, right? There's a lot of going back in that story to clarify something. And most importantly, there's a lot of empathy, right? So it's like anybody, you know, have you ever heard anyone told you a story, but they didn't think that it was a big deal, right? You know, like I've heard a guy tell me, you know, my dad hit me across the head with a hammer and I was unconscious for 2 months, and I finally came out of the coma, but he was gone away to prison, and you know, life just went on. And I'm like no, man, that's a big thing. That is huge in your life that someone did that to you, took that much time away from you, and you've got no resolution from that since, right? So that empathy, because they might come from a place, and we all know this, and it's in my family, I don't know what yours, but you could have a stake sticking through your foot in my family, and people will go, you're fine. You're fine, right? That's a thing. It's a thing, right? And for people, they need better, right? And I'll say that as a mediator, we come in and try to be as familiar as possible, but we know that professionalism to enact to get what we want, right? So I know how to ask people questions in a moment in time, in challenging them, but also making it look like we do need this answer. We need it. Like, you know, if we're going someplace, I'm like, Vikram, you got to tell me what it is, because if it isn't this, we're going that way. If it's this, we're going this way, right? And that's really that is the IDR. It's that voice that we needed growing up when that bad thing happened that we didn't have. So the IDR, and I have a whole presentation on it that goes into the intricacies of how the process goes, you know, how we engage, all these different things. But ultimately, and imagine this, through different mediation, right? We are dealing with the individual, right? So I'm saying to you, Vikram, we got to work this problem out. We talk a little while. You're like, okay, we'll do that. I'm like, case closed, right? We're done. Put it on a piece of paper, send it away, and everybody knows that's what we agreed to. Now, I ask you this. Does your brother, does your sister-in-law, does your uncle, does your aunt, do they all know how we got to this place, right? And I highly doubt they did, because they weren't here, right? That we have to, when we're looking, I just lost my train of thought for a second. I'm just saying, when we're looking at these things, you would ask me about, so I apologize for this, my brain fart.
No, that's perfect. We can discuss this maybe some other
time.
Oh
no, I got it. So once I talk to everybody in your family, the whole idea is that we bring everybody to a circle. Okay. And that's the magic part about this IDR. Because what you and I talked about and what you and I came to, you and I are going to tell the rest of your family. That's what we're going to do, you and I, right? And that is what closes the gap. That is what brings us all to one mind, right? Because a year down the road, when you slip and you know, there's 7 other people that know why, right? That they can help get you to a place. And if worst case scenario, get you back to me and we'll talk about it again, right? So that's the IDR process in a nutshell, and it's effective. It's to the point where when families go through it, and I've heard people say this, they'll say, I will never forget this. I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
Substantial.
Yeah. I think when we put together this Indigenous Peoples Mediation Circle and we have people who are doing different practices, we'll have a discussion there, and then a lot of good things will come out of that. But the important question, Jim, is, are you going to be farming on a bigger lot or not? Or is it going to be this lot?
Well, I will be farming on a bigger lot in time. My mom has a 2-acre lot out in Shwegan, out in my community, right? And we have plans one day selling this house in Hamilton and moving back there. So we'll have a bigger lot to plot on. But, for all purposes, I'm able to calculate out how many pieces of garlic that I eat, my mother-in-law eats, some of my friends and family eat. I come out to 1,000 heads of garlic, okay, right? And I plant that all back here in my backyard, and I harvest it all, I distribute it all. I trade 1 kilogram of garlic 6 times a year for a haircut.
Not bad. That's amazing.
So, bigger lot, not bigger lot, it's all a calculation, right? It's all a big calculation of how much of this do you eat, right? For instance, even I planted 3 years ago a box of asparagus, right? Asparagus is root, right? It takes 3 years to develop. I planted it, and I have asparagus all the time now, right? I give it on the streets. I put it out in the front street. I put it in a basket. People take it. I grow kale to the yin yang. People can eat greens if they want. Bok choy. There's carrots coming. There's everything's back there, right? So it's I don't think I'll grow this space, but if I do, there's some more dirt down the road I can tap into.
Well, I'm looking at this as therapy. It's like therapy. I mean, I'm sure just working with the garden, I'm sure it's a great experience.
It's they say when your hands are in the dirt, you can't get any closer to your creator than that, right there. So, yeah.
So, Jim, I think at this point, because I've already taken a lot of your time, any concluding kind of remarks or concluding thing we can then, of course, we got to continue these discussions. I mean, for today, let's have a concluding thing.
The concluding thought is that, first of all, the fact that I can broadcast my thoughts and through you, I'm very appreciative of that. Two, I don't know how big this audience is going to be, but I suspect it's quite a large one. I'll certainly be sharing your links with my thousands of people on my Facebook page. That is really important. I really appreciate that. I just want to make sure that, to let you're doing a lot of work here, and it's noted. And I want to just let you know that what you brought together here. Again, listening to my friend John Boca's talk and other people's talk, you're like, this idea you're getting out there. I appreciate that, right? And my closing message would be to people is that we shouldn't be afraid to look to the past to figure out what has happened, so that we don't repeat it in the future. That's my message.
Absolutely, and we pick up from the past and we use it in the present. I think that also
that's
we
right.
need to do.
Yep.
So, Jim, thank you very much. Really a pleasure speaking to you, and these conversations will go on.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you give me a plane ticket to India, and I'll be right over there. I'll come over.
Now, my mediation world is like totally online. I'm thinking, will I be able to do anything in relation to the mediation world offline? I don't know. I really don't know.
That's true. That's true.
Look, you can't imagine the kind of work that I'm able to do. imagine finishing one conference in the end of June, and you then start off on another symposium, and then you start off on that. You can do so much work. And I'm saying you said about audience, I'm saying that one individual sitting in one corner of the world gets inspired by what Jim is saying and does something about it. That's satisfaction enough, because I get such lovely
Right there.
messages.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
good enough for me, because the
Yeah.
messages that I get from people, I'm really, I sometimes don't even know, am I doing this? Seriously, it's, I mean, like you say, you saying it. I mean, for me, it's just has been just this. Let's just put this together. Let's just put this together. I mean, right now there must be about almost 400 videos on my YouTube channel. There's so much
Wow.
content there on every aspect, and these are things which are different from what you've been discussing otherwise, because obviously in relation to the process and all, lots of discussions happen there, but
Yeah.
looking at it in a different way. So there's lots that has happened, but now I'm, like I said, I'm focused on this mediation circles to develop them in each school and every community, which of course you are going to be part of. And let's take it, let's develop from the grassroots and make the circle big as we can. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome.
perfect.
All right, bud.
That's
Well,
it.
you take care, and it's really nice meeting you, and I appreciate this opportunity. So we'll
Really
talk soon.
nice. Yeah, really a nice conversation. Thanks a